When I was a kid, of course, I experimented a lot with electronics, was very fascinated by it. And one of the things that fascinated me was radio. And the first license you get back in those days was called a novice class license, and it only allowed you to operate on Morse code. But forced into it, and then I discovered how much I really enjoyed it. And a few months later, when I upgraded my license to the general class license, which allowed you to use voice communications, I immediately tried that out. And I just found I enjoyed the code more. Since that time, I don't think I've operated much voice at all. You notice there's no microphone in this radio installation because all I use are the telegraph keys in order to communicate with people. And this will give you an idea what it sounds like. He's talking about something about vertical angle, probably talking about his antenna. My grandparents had a house on the New Jersey shore, and I used to spend the summers there every year with my family. And we had a radio there. There's AM radio that we would use to get the news from Atlantic City. Every once in a while you were listening to the radio, all of a sudden there'd be this giant burst of very loud Morse code that would come through. A few years later, when I was 12, there was a class for amateur radio license. And this was at the Franklin Institute in Philadelphia, which is a science museum, and they had courses that you could take. And a friend of mine, neighbor, friend, my age, and I decided we wanted to go take this course and get our amateur radio licenses. But I was fortunate that the teacher was a radio amateur, of course, and he was extremely enthusiastic about the code, and he conveyed that enthusiasm to the class. And he was another one of those people in my life that just demanded perfection. When my turn would come, I'd send the copy that I was supposed to send and so on. But if somebody wasn't sending well, he would stop them and tell them gruffly what they were doing wrong. I remember one time I'm there sending, trying to do my best, and all of a sudden, whack, this ruler comes down, wham, right on the table next to me, made me jump. And he said, "Your fist is lying on the table there like a dead fish. Get your fist up in the air so that you can send properly," To this day, every time I touch a telegraph key, I still remember that because, it made a big impression on me. But he was right. That was the right way to send code. I kept ending up going back to the other end of the dial where all the code stations were because that was, like, to me, what was comfortable. At that point, code was a language that I understood. It was just like somebody talking to me. Their voice was the way they sent. Well, my father was a member of the Philadelphia Orchestra and played French horn. And the people that were our family friends were basically fellow musicians, classical musicians. And they, for the most part, were people at the top of their field, the best people in the world at what they did. Without realizing it, I was exposed to this sort of attitude of there is no second best. That was never said to me. It was obvious from my father and from the people that were our family friends that perfection was the goal and anything less was not acceptable. In our household, we never listened to recorded music. My father didn't enjoy listening to recorded music. We didn't even listen to the radio. But I was exposed to a lot of live music because I would go to concerts. My mother had a season ticket for the Philadelphia Orchestra concerts, and if she didn't go for some reason, I would go. Sometimes I even sat on stage with my father during a rehearsal and was exposed to not only the process of creating great music through, a conductor's interpretation of it, but also I learned what it was like to be in the middle of this giant machine It really influenced how I heard things. I did not hear things as recorded music. I heard live music. And it wasn't until I was a teenager listening finally to the music of the 60s when the 60s music revolution came along. I found that music very interesting, and it really changed um, my attitude towards recorded music because I just had never given it a thought one way or the other prior to that. The high school that I went to had an FM broadcast station. It was very low powered, only covered, radius of 10 miles or so, but it was hugely influential on me and many other people that went there. We ran this radio station very professionally, and that was due to the influence of another one of those people who was demanded perfection. He was a technical advisor who worked for one of the big radio and television stations in Philadelphia, and he would come in a couple days a week and demand perfection from all of us, down to the way we wound cables. I can remember spending hours, it seemed to me, in the hallway winding up these 100-foot cables, and he would come look at it and say, "Not good enough," and he'd throw it down the hallway and make me wind it up again. And to this day, I can wind cables in my sleep because of that. The big influence of that radio station came about because, in addition to just playing records and having announcers and typical radio things, we also recorded and broadcast a lot of school events. And we had some really good equipment. It was amazing the stuff that we had. We had Ampex tape machines, and we had some really good microphones. We would set up mics in the auditorium to record a concert or whatever. And I was never happy with the way it sounded. It just sounded to me just awful. And I was constantly experimenting, trying to figure out how can we make this sound better? Where do we put these mics to make this sound right? My father taught at many levels. He taught at home, private students. He taught for several universities and music schools in the area. There were times when he would have a recital with some of his students. And after I got to the point where I was actually doing some recording on my own, he would ask me to record those for him. One situation I remember, I did a recording. It was a big horn ensemble, a lot of French horns in a big ensemble. And I recorded it the way I normally would, with a good perspective like you might hear from a good seat in a concert hall. And he was not particularly impressed with the recording. Later, I tried something different. In addition to the mics I normally use, I also put a mic back in a position where if he were playing in that orchestra, where he would be sitting. And I recorded that track separately. And I gave him that recording, and he loved that because to him, that was the way he was used to hearing the orchestra, from that perspective, not from the audience's perspective. Inevitably, I guess, after recording the school orchestra and everything, I started getting requests from friends of mine, some that worked at the radio station, some that didn't, to record their bands because at this point in the mid-'60s, people were starting to create their own music. They're trying to duplicate the records that they heard on the radio and they love. And so I said, well, how do I record this? This is real different than recording an orchestra because I know how to do that sort of. But recording a band was a whole different thing. For one thing, you had very mismatched dynamical situations where you had somebody singing, who could not be heard over drums and electric guitars and all that. Now you had to figure out how to solve these problems. How did you record the drums so that I only had one mic for the drums. Where did I put that mic so that I could get everything I needed in that drum set that sounded right to me? Where did I put, maybe I had only one mic that I had to split between two electric guitars. So where do I put that mic so I get a good balance between them? And the biggest problem, how do I record this vocalist who, couldn't even be heard if you stood in the room, even if you're standing right next to him over all this racket? How do I get his vocal to work over top of all this? And it was solving those kinds of problems that led me to understand that there's a difference between recording a concert, a symphony orchestra or a band orchestra, high school orchestra, than making a record, because making a record is a different process. This is a process where the person doing the recording is part of the process. They're not just passively sitting there trying to capture everything exactly as it happens. You're actually part of the process of making the music. And that was a real revelation to me. And that at that point, I decided that was one thing I really wanted to do. This is where we build things. This isn't where we normally do a recording, but it turns out to be a pretty good spot for doing recording, and it makes it easier for me than lugging all this gear somewhere else. One of the fun things about doing this project is it gives me an opportunity to record virtually everything with vacuum tubes. In fact, on these recordings that we do, the only solid state things are in the digital converters. So what we use is a combination of VT1 and VT2 mic preamps. And in reality, like, there's a VT2 and a VT1 sitting over here on the table that were just burning in prior to shipment. In the rack over here, I have my personal VT2, which, you know, I've had for years. And we'll just use that as one of the other channels. And over there on the test bench is another VT2, which we'll be using today. That's another one that is just finishing its checkout and getting ready to ship out to a customer. You know, every preamp, every piece that we build, I personally test, and I personally listen to everything too. I don't let anything go out the door that I haven't listened to. For recording this project today, we're going to be using the Radar 24. Which is a hard disk recorder, which appeals to me because, being a guy that spent most of my life recording on tape, this is the next best thing to tape. For monitoring, I use this little Neve mixer, which I've had for about 30 years. And for our listening, I'm using an old pair of UREI 811Bs, which I've had for many, many years. Not an ideal setup in here, but they work fine, and I'm very familiar with those. Generally, I'll end up mixing these things on Pro Tools just because you get spoiled with the versatility and the ease with Pro Tools. It makes it so much simpler.
Oh, yeah.
So we're setting up for the drums, which we're going to put in here in the garage, which is not the ideal acoustic environment, but it's an interesting acoustic environment. So, of course, in this space, we pick up a ton of room sound, and it sounds like a garage. But that's okay. There's so much junk in here, it gives us a lot of diffusion. One of the problems, the drums is not a problem. Other things I've recorded in here have been a problem because you hear the birds outside. Here will be the singer-songwriter, Tom. And I enjoy working with him because we've worked together so much over the years that it's a very easy process for both of us. And we'll record his vocal and acoustic guitar at the same times with the drums and bass.
Where do you anticipate these players standing? Singer roughly here?
Yeah, he'll be there somewhere, and the bass player can be anywhere.
Okay. I consider Doug to still be a mentor of mine, even though I've been working in sound and voiceover for about 30 years, but still have things to learn. In exchange for providing some cheap labor, I get to take advantage of his expertise when I need it. And that's come in very handy.
Sort of by necessity for our recording session, we're working down here in our parts storage area. It's a basement, you know, it's got cinder block walls. It's very, very solid because it's dirt on the other side of most of these walls. If there was nothing in this space, it would probably sound terrible, but we have so much stuff, it just gives us a lot of absorption, a lot of diffusion. For doing the final vocals on this, I'll probably use something else. I'm fortunate to have lots of friends in the microphone manufacturing business, and I can always get something interesting to try out. So I trust Ian to do the mic setup because he's just really good at it.
The accidental energizing of machines or equipment during routine service or maintenance work is the primary cause of workplace injuries and deaths. It's estimated that failure to control energy in a safe, effective manner accounts for almost 10% of all serious workplace accidents.
Oh, we're not getting up to the red on. Wow, we can't do that. That would be too exciting.
I had been working in radio for 2 or 3 years when the salespeople at the small station where I was working discovered that I actually enjoyed producing commercials. And I discovered that not only was it enjoyable to do that sort of work, but if the spots aired elsewhere or didn't air on the station where I was working, I got paid. And that was kind of nice. I first met Doug Fearn when I was an intern at Kiss 100 Radio in the Philadelphia market. I showed up for my first day and saw this guy walking across the back of the office and wondered who he was. And soon got to learn that this kind, gentle fellow was one of the smartest people I would ever meet. He knows everything that, as far as I can tell, everything there is to know about radio engineering and about a lot of different types of electronics. But he's also able to apply that in very practical ways. The preamp that I'm blessed to use each and every day is a wonder of electronics as far as I know, but it sounds great, but it's extremely usable. It's every time I set the volume knob to a particular place, it performs exactly the same way. If you're curious about how this preamp sounds, you're listening to it right now. I'm providing a feed from the Fearn preamp directly to the videographer. One of the things that's important to a voiceover talent when choosing equipment is that it's fairly simple, that it's very reliable and doesn't require a lot of maintenance work, and also that it's easy to use. This Shure KSM-44 microphone is also very simple, very straightforward, just a few knobs on it, but it sounds without EQ just the way I want it to sound for narration or commercial work. It has a little bit of sizzle on the top that's common to condenser microphones. It has a little bit of a presence peak, which tends to mix well with today's production music tracks. And so I don't have to do much to it in post.
When I first started developing the microphone preamplifier, the question, of course, arose, well, what tubes am I going to use, and are tubes even available? And I was pleased to find that there were tubes available, but I knew from my experience from being a kid building audio circuits that some tubes sounded really good and a lot of tubes sounded really bad. And it wasn't a matter of the circuit, it was just a characteristic of the tube. So I zeroed in on certain tubes that I just found sonically worked really nicely. And those tubes, and really in all our products, I only use 2 different tube types. And those are the 2 tubes that I've found over the years are, sonically what I'm looking for. I use test equipment because you need to be able to quantify what you're doing. But to a large extent, those products are designed by ear because once you get into the ballpark, when you get the circuit working properly and it's doing essentially what you want it to do, it's just a matter from there to do the fine tuning to get it to sound just the way you want it to sound. And I can't define the sound that I'm looking for, but no matter what I did, everything I would build would end up having the same family sound. There's often times when I get done was something that I'm pleased with the way it sounded. I start doing some measurements on it, and I say, wow, the distortion on this is really much higher than it needs to be. And I say, let's see if we can fix that. And I go through it, and I knew where the distortion was coming from, and I make the circuit changes to bring the distortion down and listen to it and say, I don't like the way that sounds. It doesn't sound musical to me. It doesn't conform to the image I have in my head of what music's supposed to sound like. It's hard to take something that measures beautifully and say, that doesn't sound right. I'm going to make it measure terribly, but it's going to sound better. Ultimately, we're not building equipment for test equipment. We're building equipment for people to listen to. And that's the ultimate judge of whether it's right or wrong, is what it sounds like, not what it measures like. The prototype of the VT1 mic preamp I built point to point, which is the old-fashioned way, the way things have been built since the 1920s through the 1960s. But it was the way that you built things back then, because you had a tube socket that bolted into a hole in a metal chassis, and you had little terminal strips where you made connections between resistors and capacitors in the tube socket and so on. Today, most stuff, even vacuum tube stuff, is built using printed circuit boards. And that's very convenient, very fast. It's a very cheap way to build things. It does have some problems when you're dealing with tubes because they generate a lot of heat, and that heat eventually causes some problems with the boards. But I don't know, just building a tube thing on a printed circuit board to me just didn't appeal to me. I just like the idea, the old-fashioned way of building it on a metal chassis. And that's the way I designed it to be built. And I came to a realization later when I was designing printed circuit boards, because we do use them in power supplies and some other things that aren't critical for the audio characteristics, that doing thing with that point-to-point wiring allows you to build in 3 dimensions, because the less tortuous you make the path for it, the better things work. There's less susceptibility of picking up extraneous noises and coupling into other circuits and so on. So I built it that way first because that's what I was comfortable with, and I continued building it that way because I think it sounds better that way. Yeah, that's with no cut.
Right. Oh, wow.
Like everybody in recording, you end up using equalization a lot of the times on microphones, and oftentimes it's used to correct a problem. I think often that's the wrong reason to use an equalizer. It shouldn't be used to solve the problem. You should go find the source of the problem and fix it there. I wanted to develop an equalizer that took something that already sounded really good and made it sound exceptionally good. The Trident parametric equalizer, which is a very limited production equalizer, and I loved that equalizer, and it just did everything I ever wanted an equalizer to do. And it sort of kept me from developing an equalizer on my own because I had these models in my mind of things that I thought were exceptionally good, and I didn't know whether I could do something that would exceed those or not. So I thought that I would see what I could do with an equalizer. If nothing else, something for my own use, and if it turned out to be good, that other people might like, it could become a product. That's the way I've always done everything. Everything's always been to fill a need of mine, and then I see if anybody else wants to buy it. I had in mind a sound for the equalizer. I knew that I wanted to do it with passive equalization. I knew that there were a lot of good passive equalizers out there, the Pultec being the classic that everybody knows and is sort of a benchmark. But I also thought that I could do better, much better, in the electronic part of that, the amplifier section of that. And I did. I thought the way I determined whether it was what I was looking for or not was by listening to it, and listening to it a lot. For 6 months, I sat there with this equalizer on my test bench, all loaded with alligator clips so I could keep changing values of different components all the time. When I finally got to the point where I said, this sounds pretty good, I'm going to compare this to my benchmark, my Trident parametric equalizer, which I really liked. I said, I'm never going to use this Trident again because what I've designed is right for me. It may not be the perfect equalizer for everybody, but it's the right equalizer for me. And that's what became the VT4. And we discovered that we were selling them almost all in pairs. Every single time we'd sell a VT4, it was two of them, because people were using them as on the stereo bus in a mix. And from that, we developed the VT5, which was exactly the same device, but it was stereo. And this was a true stereo where you had one set of controls that controlled both channels simultaneously. I enjoy the code, just because it's so easy to understand. And when I became a pilot, I discovered that the navigational stations were all identified with code. And my first instructor was trying to teach me how to do that. And he would put one of the stations on and then say, okay, now translate that. And I would just do it instantly. And he'd say, oh, you must know that one. And he'd try another one, and I'd be able to do that. And actually, to me, it's easier to identify those things by the code because the letters are unambiguous. When somebody's saying the letters, they can be slurred and you can mishear them. We haven't had weather like this in a long time. All these good days in a row.
Yeah.
Very unusual.
Well, that rain and stuff is finally out of the system.
Yeah, for a while anyway. Well, I started learning to fly here in the 1980s, and I've owned an airplane based here now for 22 years in the same hangar, Everett, for 22 years. Wow. And I love flying.
Doug's been a lot of help for me because every once in a while I have an aviation electrical problem, which is a little bit over my head, and he's helped me figure out to troubleshoot stuff where the transistors weren't working right. And the other day he brought out his fancy multimeter so he could make sure that the airplane wasn't running the battery down when it was parked in the hangar.
So what is this airplane you're working on?
It's a 1946 Cessna 140. It was the first of the lightweight Cessnas made after the war. They were all wood-winged, fabric-covered aircraft before the war, and after the war they came out with these.
Got your IA certification. That's great. Congratulations.
Yeah, well, the IA is your inspection authorization. It's a rating or a certificate you get from the FAA, which allows you added responsibilities as an aviation mechanic.
Yeah, every airplane is required to have an annual inspection, and mine will be due in the fall. And it's always been done here. I've always participated in it. It requires a licensed aircraft mechanic to do the actual inspection, and somebody with that inspection authorization to sign it off. But under his supervision, I can do a lot of the work, with Bruce or Everett or somebody looking over what I'm doing and making sure I'm not doing anything stupid. And it's been a great learning experience.
Stairs, be careful.
Yeah, this is kind of tricky stairway. Morning, Bruce.
Hey,
How are you?
you doing any aviating?
Yeah, probably going to go flying a little bit this morning. This airport was founded in the early 1970s by Lex DuPont, who owned a number of airplanes, including a Grumman Wildcat. And he built this airport for his own use and generously opened it up to the pilot community. And now we have a couple hundred airplanes here. This spray booth back here, where you can see all kinds of airplane parts being prepared for painting, is where my front panels for many years for all my products were painted, right in here. Probably if you look around somewhere, you'll see some overspray of W Fearn red paint somewhere on the walls. And they did a beautiful job because they're just real craftsmen here. The ones that they painted here originally are still some of the most beautiful ones we ever had done. It used to be, there was a rack, it might have even been that rack that was set up specifically for painting my panels. And it was used for many years for that purpose. When I built the first VT1, what became the VT1 microphone preamplifier prototype, it just had a plain silver aluminum front panel because it was just a stock panel. And I thought, well, if I'm going to give this to somebody to take a listen to it and give me an opinion, I should make it look a little fancier than this. And one of my inspirations was a Hewlett-Packard oscillator that I had had since the 1960s. It was, back when the Hewlett-Packard company built test equipment, not computers. And I looked at that, and I just always liked the design of it. I liked the way it was laid out. I liked the balance of the components on the front panel. I mean, it was not only functionally proper, but it was also aesthetically proper. And I liked the color. It was kind of an interesting blue-gray color. And I thought, well, nobody's building audio equipment that I know of that uses that kind of color. Maybe I'll do something like that. It looks good. So I went to the hardware store, and I'm looking at the cans of spray paint there, and I find something that looks, the kind of bluish gray, and I'm thinking, boy, that's really a dull color. That's a dumb color. And I'm looking further down the line, and there's a red paint, a dark maroon kind of burgundy red paint. And I thought, well, let me just paint it like this. Doesn't matter. This is just a prototype. Nobody's going to ever see this except the people I lend it to give me some feedback. So I bought the red paint, and I brought it back and painted this panel by hand and did the silk screen lettering on it by hand and gave it to people. They, their first reaction is, why is it red? And I said, I don't know. I like that color. It just appealed to me. And, it went from, why is it red, to, wow, I really like that color. That's really nice looking color. And that's how the red color came about. It was just a whim. It's just a color I picked out one day and said, I like this color. I'm going to paint it that color. People responded to it. I really didn't have a lot of confidence in my ability to do that. I didn't think I really knew enough. I had no formal education as an electronic engineer or anything. Everything I know about electronics I learned on my own. So I did lack a certain amount of self-confidence getting started doing that. But I thought, well, if nothing else, I'll build something that I can use myself. If somebody else is interested in buying it, that's great, but I'm going to build this for myself. And the first thing that I needed for my own recording was a microphone preamplifier, because all the microphone preamplifiers that I had, and this was the days before there were a lot of outboard mic preamps, things were built into consoles, mixers, or whatever. And I had built those circuits myself. I built my own little console for location recording. But I wanted something better, and I kept thinking, well, when I first started my recording studio, I couldn't afford a big console. So I had to build something myself. And what I built was really just a conglomeration of a bunch of old tube mic preamps that I had basically pulled out of the trash at WPEN when they decided they didn't want them anymore. I started thinking those were great sounding mic preamps. Can I do that again? I started looking into it, and I thought, wow, not only can I do this again, but I can do it a lot better, because there's just a lot more great stuff out there to use as the building blocks for this than we had back then, particularly transformers, which are vital to the sound of anything. And I put together a mic preamp, and I got it to work, and it worked well, and it was quiet. It was, a good 20 dB quieter than any other tube mic preamp that I had ever worked with. That was important, because this was the age when digital was coming along, and you had 90 dB noise floor, so you had to have a quiet mic preamp. So could you do that with tubes? Well, I found out that you could, and I built a couple of these mic preamps, and I gave them to a couple friends of mine who had studios and said, try this out, give me some feedback. And I had great feedback. They didn't want to give me the thing back. They just wanted to keep it, even though it was a very crude prototype. One of the things that when I started developing this mic preamp was I knew that, at least for myself, I didn't want to compromise anywhere in it. I wanted to use the best possible parts. I built so much stuff over the years. I built a lot of stuff that were used in the radio station, and there it had to be 100% reliable. It had to work perfectly 24 hours a day for years at a time, because radio stations off the air, anything that goes wrong, they're out of business. When I started thinking about, well, what do I want to do? I mean, obviously I wanted the thing to sound exceptional. It had to sound really good, and I had a sound in my head of what I wanted it to sound like, because, all those years at WPEN, I worked in a radio station that didn't have a single transistor in the building, and it sounded terrific. It really sounded good. And so obviously, tubes were going to be the way I was going to go with this mic preamp. But I also wanted to use the very best parts that I could. And I located all the best stuff and used that. And I kept thinking, well, if I'm going to make this into a product, this is going to be really expensive, because I'm using really expensive parts here. And at one point I just said, you know what? That's too bad. I'm not going to design this thing to a price that I think people will pay. I'm going to design this thing to be the best possible mic preamp I can build, and we'll determine what does it cost to build and how much do I have to charge to sell these things for. So that's the way I did it. And, purposely in looking at the market, I said, what niche in the market do I want to be in? Where do I position myself? And the obvious answer, and it really didn't require any thought at all, is I wanted to be at the top end of the market. It was going to be expensive, because that's what you have to do to get the best possible stuff. So I wanted to design it that way. And that meant not only using really good parts, but knowing how to specify those parts so they're reliable and will last long term. But also mechanically, it had to be right. It had to be solid. It had to be strong. It had to be something that could be kicked around for, the next 50 years and still keep working. And so instead of using 16th inch sheet metal, wherever 16th inch was used, I'd use 1/8 inch. Wherever 1/8 inch used, I'd use 1/4 inch. Our front panels are, a 1/4 inch thick, because to me that just felt right. It felt like the right thing to do if you're building a product to last, and a product that conveys quality. It has to be at every level. It can't just be sonically. It all had to be really good and really reliable and really last for a long time. CPS Metals has been making my metalwork for my products for a number of years, and Tom there and his brother Paul and all the great people that work there do a terrific job, and they're always coming up with new ideas, suggestions on how we can fabricate these things to make them better, and I really rely on their expertise.
I'm Tom Pelzarski. I'm one of the owners here. I'll give you a quick guided tour of my precision sheet metal shop here and how we were able to fabricate some parts for Mr. W Fearn and his audio equipment. This is where all our production starts, at the piercing department, and these are our computer-controlled piercing machines. We happen to have a pair of Wiedemann C3000s. And this basically, whatever material is selected, we pierce the patterns, holes, cutouts required by our customer. Over at this machine here, we just so happen to be running at one of D.W. Fearn's rear panels for his VT1. And again, it's basically running in the flat, and this is the first operation of the whole sequence. In this particular part, there's 13 tool changes. He says to me, the last time I ran his panels, it pulled a slug on a big round hole. He says, I hope it doesn't happen this time. And gives a new meaning to the shake and break. and this is dead nuts within 3 thousandths. Very little is required. After he'll break these apart, they'll go over to the forming department. Over here we have our whole list of brakes. We have a full line of automatic and manual PEM inserters, and their basic jobs is to turn around and load press hardware into, which makes it easier for final assembly. It has a whole range of hardware, whether it be metric or the standards, including PEM nuts and some swages.
When Tom finishes my parts here, they're complete except for the pieces that need painting, like the front panel and the front and rear panels, which need silkscreen, which are done elsewhere. But CPS Metals works very closely with my silk screeners, so they make it a seamless process for me. I just pick up finished parts, and it's worked out really well. We've been working with Tom for 6 or 7 years now, and we're just really pleased with the high quality job and
I appreciate that.
accommodating all our changes, because we're always modifying things, and they just take
Keeping
it
up
in
with the
stride.
times.
Yeah.
Keeping up with the times. Over here we have our machining centers. And this, unfortunately, I don't have any parts for you to show from Doug Fearn's, because we try to accommodate him as quickly as possible. But what we do here is basically a vertical machining center. And this, in this case, is a particular intricate part. I have no clue on what it's used for, but as you can see, the finish is magnificent. What I really like to do is get a laser in this area here, and you know. That's a red hot one.
Yeah, the truck in front of me
Excuse me.
driving threw up in the snow and crashed my windshield.
And try to prove it. They won't do anything about it. They did that to the truck within driving. And that's the thing
walk
about
slow.
Dennis.
Yeah.
That's what's so nice about Dennis, you know?
Yep.
He says, don't get me wrong, I like being here with you guys, but this is perfect for me. Perfect,
Yeah.
you know? So
I don't know if that's going to clear.
that's not going anywhere.
Yeah, I know. I
Keep
mean,
on
I
it.
can hear the door lock. Nope.
Voila. Great. All right, Mr. Doug.
Dennis Hallahan at Screen Tech has been doing my silkscreen work for the front panels and the back panels ever since I started this business. And he is really a true artist when it comes to getting the most possible out of silkscreen work.
And you have various models here because there's so much of it in here. You know, you're afraid to throw anything away because you might decide you might get an old unit or something that comes back. But anyway, finally back on track here. These are clamps. It just basically hinges. They clamp the frame into place so it lifts up out of the way. We tighten this down. We line it up underneath. And we did good. It's not rocket science, but it takes somewhat of a skill. It's easy to mess it up, especially when you have fresh paint. We have the alignment persuader here. You're in. Tighten these babies up. And the next thing is, you gotta pick out a squeegee. But it's, okay, that one's big enough. Which, by the way, we're running a little low. Everything here is weighed. So now we got the ink mixed up. We do add a few things to it. Well, we're at a point, Doug, where from here it'll get done, you know?
Yeah. Well, I've got, probably on Friday, I've got Mike picking up some stuff.
Make sure that ink's good. Alrighty. Okay. And voila. And I gotta tell you, it looks pretty darn good. So we're gonna go to the next one. There is a time limit. You really can't. You have to do one after another. I've been doing this for about 25, 30 years. And I've been printing on metal. Well, I used to work in a sheet metal shop. That's how I got started in this business. And they had me screen print metal. I had no idea what I was doing, but they let me learn on my own, and I just ran with it from there. One's gonna take the cold out of the metal. It's about 238 degrees. That's about what we want, you know? We don't want too hot, it'll burn.
One of the things that I find really interesting is that the radio frequencies are different every day, throughout the day. They change constantly. Some people find this frustrating because it's not predictable in a lot of cases, except in a very general way. But I find it really interesting. It's like you walk into a room and you open the door and you're not sure what you're going to find in there. It's a whole new place. Some days it'll be full of people talking. Some days there'll be one person. Some days there'll be none. You know, for people today who grew up with the internet or have adopted using the internet for their communications, the idea that you can talk to people all over the world just doesn't seem all that miraculous. It really wasn't all that long ago that even making a long-distance phone call was a major production. So today, it would seem that this kind of communications would be just completely superseded by the internet. But it's an entirely different thing. In the early 1970s, I met a guy who became a great friend. He lived in Canada, and we continued that conversation on a weekly basis for over 30 years. And at one point during that time, we decided as something interesting to try, we would learn the original Morse code. The code that's commonly used now was developed around the turn of the century, it's the 20th century. But prior to that, for the railroads, they used a code that was slightly different. And it's actually a more interesting code. To me, to my ear, it's more musical, it's more interesting to listen to. So we finally learned it, and we got to the point where we would converse in that exclusively, and we did that for many years. It was kind of fun because we knew that there were hardly any people left in the world that knew that code. So we knew that there was nobody listening in on our conversation. We had our own private conversation because nobody else knew that code. Even though he didn't live all that far away, for one reason or another, we never got together to meet. But we used this American Morse code throughout most of the time we were communicating. I'm going to give you an example. First, I'll send the word. The word I'm sending is transceiver, and I'm sending it first in the modern code, and then I'll repeat it in the American Morse, the old original code. You can hear they're really different. And actually, the old code is about a third faster, which means that you can, for the same amount of effort in sending, you can cover a third more territory in the same given amount of time. When I started out, I couldn't afford really expensive equipment. I was a kid. I made the money, for a receiver like that, painting the house. The receivers I had were not very selective, which meant that you heard a wide variety of signals simultaneously. So if there was a crowded band and it was full of code signals, you'd hear maybe 6 dozen of them simultaneously, all at slightly different pitches, each one sending a little bit different speed and so on. And it really required you to use your brain to separate those. You couldn't separate them electronically with that crude equipment. You had to develop your ability to focus on one particular sound and exclude all the others, which I found I could do after a while. Then when I started recording, I learned that skill was very valuable because it allowed me to zero in on a particular sound during a recording and exclude all the others and just focus on that one thing that was important and, deal with that. Now, of course, in recording, details are real important, but so is the big picture. So I also had to develop the ability to narrow that focus and then widen it out again and listen to things as a whole. I did recording sessions every day for many years, and as much as I loved it, there were times when I just got really sick of doing that. And I started this manufacturing business in 1993 and really enjoy this as well. But there's something about recording that I just can't leave behind. For the vocal today, we're using a AKG 414, which I think is a terrific sounding mic, and we may end up using that on the final vocal. And then for the guitar, the acoustic guitar, we're using a Neumann SM69, which is a stereo condenser mic. That makes it easy.
More weeks, it will be Christmas. With any luck, we'll be back then.
I've been recording with Tom McIntyre now for, oh my goodness, it's got to be close to 40 years. He's a singer-songwriter, very talented guy. He's been doing music all his life. And periodically he has new songs that he'd like to do demos of. And I often do those with him, and I enjoy working with him because when he comes to do a recording session, he's entirely prepared, and everybody and the musicians he has backing him up are all rehearsed and ready to go, and we don't waste any time. For the drums here today, we're using a AEA R88 ribbon, it's a stereo ribbon microphone overhead to pick up the main drum set, and we're using a B&K 4007 down here on the bass drum. You can see this is not a typical bass drum. It's really more of a practice drum, but it records fine. We may end up moving that mic up a little bit higher. I think it's a little too close. My ultimate goal is to get to the point where I'm recording drums with one mic. Sooner or later, I'll get there.
Tell without end. And it's been told through the ages.
And we may try the SM69 on by as well.
Man, love a man.
19 becomes 23. 23. People walking in and out. I need them all coming through on this side so we can close the door.
Over by the door.
Yeah, okay. So we'll have a lot of people coming in to listen.
Sure. Yeah, playback on headphones is no fun.
Yeah. Can you go check the headphones and see if...
Yep.
But you know, to a large extent, after we've been doing this for all these years, it's just the process of recording these songs that we really enjoy. So, okay. Yeah, we need a little more bass guitar in here.
All right, well, let me experiment for a minute here. Actually, I have to move that back a little bit.
Can everybody hear okay?
Yeah.
Playing bass is Bennett Sykes, and Bennett has played bass for all his life, and he's just really good at the parts, and he knows how to adjust his bass, and he knows which bass instrument to bring for recording, and it makes it so simple. I record his bass with nothing, no compression, no EQ. I may add some compression in the mix, but generally speaking, it's fine just the way it is. On these sessions, in fact, we use the VT3 DI for all the electric instruments, so nobody brings any amps. Sometimes I wish they would, just so we'd have a little bit more versatility in the sound, but we get excellent sounds. It's just from the DI right into a VT2 and right to the recorder from there.
Sounds good in the headphones.
Good.
The smell of that woman. That's one hell of a man.
Let's just see what that sounds like. I wasn't totally unhappy with the way it was before. I just wanted to see if we could get something better.
The good lives that we had.
Playing on the session today is Steve Nicely, who's you'll see playing drums on the rhythm track. But Steve's really a multi-instrumentalist and a just excellent guitar, and has this really superb sense of what the song needs and how to do it and how to make it sound like a record. You know, he's just really good at that.
Try and get some of this stuff out of the way.
Okay, Tom.
Sorry about the delay.
That's all right.
2, 3.
There may be some false starts here.
1, 2, 3.
Is this the first one? Or
No, this is the one we just did.
You think that was the best one?
You ready now?
Yeah, we can listen to the other ones if you want.
The football game is on the TV. Doesn't matter who's playing. They will gather with our families.
During singing, the gathering of the clan, I've seen me with you.
That I'll be given. It's for the gathering of the clan.
I think by the end, everybody was really playing it right, you know? We probably should have done another one right after it. But what do you think?
That's pretty close.
Yeah. Okay, we're rolling. Man, these drums are right on the verge.
Yeah.
I like starting it this way. That gives me lots of interesting options for how to start the tune.
To see the gathering of the clan, I'll thank my God that I was living. To see the gathering of the clan.
Chili.
Chili.
Oh, which one is it? I don't know.
That one.
Here's some crackers.
How about the plastic spoon?
Yeah.
Plastic spoons.
Oh, thank you.
And we'll get Phil for
Ben,
lunch.
you want
too.
half of this roll to go?
Sure,
with
man.
chili?
Yeah, man. Yes, I do.
Salt and pepper.
I got chicken pot.
And when the shells are breaking, and I find who I am,
Yeah.
my final spell of that woman made one hell of a man.
Everybody's worn out, and it's better to quit when it's still sounding good, because it's diminishing returns after that. I think it worked fine. We'll probably do one more session, and Steve will do some guitar overdubs. He's got a great collection of all kinds of guitars, and we'll get Tom's vocals done when his voice is in good shape and he hasn't been smoking cigars. Oh, look at him.
Any chance we could get an organ on that last song? Get Kenny over here again?
Sure.
I had that cold that wouldn't go away.
So generally, when we record these tracks, we just use the VT1 and VT2 mic preamps right into the recorder, which in this case is a Radar 24. On some tracks, I'll end up using a VT7 or a VT5 or VT4 equalizer on the individual tracks. But for the most part, I try to keep the amount of processing to a minimum, keep it as natural as sounding as I can. In recording in the basement here, it's it's not a bad sounding room, but it doesn't have a whole lot of room sound to it. So I often end up using some artificial reverb, and one of my favorite things for that is the Quantec. Almost always I'll use a VT7 compressor followed by a VT5 equalizer on the mix bus, because that gives it that kind of final cohesiveness that you really need to bring everything into the right sound.
The specificity of the VT7 is that it is a compressor that tries not necessarily to be forgotten, but it's one of the most transparent compressions I know anyway. That is, you would like to have an assistant with very fast fingers, and that's what you find on the VT7. It treats the dynamic of the sound to make it something efficient in the mix without bringing some of the artifacts you can find on any other compressor. That is, changing the tone of the source, making the sound aggressive, or the scene too narrow. Here you have the impression that you can compress from 3 to 6 to 8 dB. You reduce the dynamic. You don't have the impression that you're compromising the quality of the sound or its integrity. It's kind of magic. Its color is like if you were adding a thin layer of lacquer on the mix. It gives this finish that I can't find anywhere. That's obvious. Aesthetically, they actually look like they sound. They're big, they're red. The VT7 has this kind of shiny color, these big knobs, and it's true that finally the sound that comes out of VT7 has this warm and generous side that you can find in the looks of the machine. In 2005, I go to the website and I was thinking maybe it would be crazy if one day they were coming out with a compressor. It could only be something incredible. I was so much in love with my VT2 that I thought, I hope they don't come out with a compressor because I'll go crazy. And I look at the site, and what do I see? The VT7 is announced. I immediately sent a mail. It's an incredible coincidence. I have to say that I'm an absolute fan of your preamp, and I have been for years, and I owe you many of the records I did. We remained in contact by mail, and we decided to meet at the Paris AES in 2006. And in fact, we discovered that we had many common interests in history and specifically in aviation. I'm an aviation fan, and he's an excellent pilot. And as he saw, I was fascinated by audio and machines. I wanted to know how he worked, and he invited me in Pennsylvania where he lives, and we can exchange a lot of things. And the aviation is what sort of brought us together.
Aspects of the airplane that we can to make sure everything's in perfect condition. We need to announce what we're doing, make sure nobody's around. We check the flight controls to make sure there's nothing binding in the control system. We check how our navigation and communications radios are set. Do one last check of our checklist to make sure we haven't forgotten anything. New Garden traffic, Cherokee 24 Bravo departing 6 New Garden. We accelerate the airplane to about 55 knots right there. We lift the nose wheel off the ground. And then as soon as the airplane's ready to fly, the main wheels will come off, and we're flying. We accelerate till we're up to about 90 to 100 knots. Now we can make a turn to the left here, out of the pattern. New Garden traffic, Cherokee 24 Bravo departing the pattern to the north. Well, definitely flying is a technological pursuit, especially if you fly in the clouds, you know, on instruments. And it was always something that to me was always very intuitive and comfortable. It's a great distraction from the daily work. I try to go flying every week. Generally only the weekends are time that I have available to do it. And you can see, although it's a little bit under the clouds right now, but as we get closer to it, you'll be able to see better, is Chesapeake Bay. Off to the left is Delaware Bay. There was a time when my metalwork was made by a company that was owned by a friend of mine in New Jersey. He was also a pilot and built his business right at a small airport similar to where we just departed in New Jersey. And I would fly over there, land at that airport. I could taxi on the grass right up to the building, and we'd load all the metalwork into the back of the airplane, and I'd fly it back. Now we're over Delaware, and across the river here is New Jersey. And you see almost straight ahead is the Salem nuclear plant. We have 3 of them that are situated in a way that you can always kind of triangulate your position. Sometimes I'll use the airplane to fly to visit dealers or go to trade shows. A few years ago, I flew to Los Angeles for the AES show. This is our main navigation source, which is a combination device which has a GPS, which is becoming the primary navigational mode for most flying. But it also contains communications radios and receivers for ground-based navigational equipment. We see now that you can see the ocean there. It's much more cloudy. I always like flying over the clouds. It's very pretty. Smooth, the air's generally smooth above the clouds. I don't think that I consciously think about business or designs or new products or anything when I'm flying, but I really believe that when your mind is unconsciously working on a problem, that having a distraction like this actually facilitates the process. So if I'm trying to solve some sort of design problem, having trouble making a circuit do what I want or whatever, a lot of times I'll just say, you know, this is a job for the unconscious, and I'll just walk away from it, and I might, it's not often that I can just walk out the door and go flying. That would be great. 90-degree turn to the left, 20 degrees of flaps.
Fifth in traffic, 978 Mike, inbound from the southeast, 6 miles out for runway 10, Tipton.
New Garden traffic, Cherokee 24 Bravo, left base turning to final 6, New Garden. And put full flaps. Back to power. That noise you heard was a stall warning horn. That tells us the airplane is just about to stop flying. Yeah. That's what you want. You want the airplane to touch down to absolute minimum speed. We're located in Chester County, Pennsylvania, which is about 25 miles west of Philadelphia. I grew up in this area, but where I lived in my youth was closer to the city. It just seems like the right place for me. We love the area. Well, we live on a plot of land. It's 10 acres, which is almost entirely all wooded. We've lived in this township for over 25 years, and I've been somewhat involved in the local government. And the one thing that I do now is I'm on the historical committee, and my particular area of expertise is recording oral history with the older residents of the township. This township was part of a land grant by William Penn in the 1680s. And we have a lot of families around here that have actually been on this land since that date. Same family, same name, and they've lived here all this time. And there's also some history more recent right around here, because during the Revolutionary War, one of the first battles was called the Battle of the Brandywine, which was not a very well-known battle because the British won decisively in that battle. And the British troops marched from the place where they were encamped in Kennett Square, which is about 6 or 7 miles to the southwest of here, to the Battle of the Brandywine, which is just a few miles to our east. And the road that runs right along the edge of our property is actually the road where the British troops actually went on their way to the battle. Down our driveway is an old ruins of a barn, a stone barn that was built in the early 1800s, maybe even before that, we're not sure exactly. And it was a grain thrashing barn where the farmers would bring their grain from all around the area to the top part of the barn and dump it in there, and then the various mechanical stuff that they used to separate the wheat would be operated, and the wheat would fall down into wagons in the bottom of the barn. And since we're here about 50 or 100 feet higher in elevation than the barn, this is where all the wagons would come in to get to the top of the barn. The road for that is right along the back of our property here. Now that barn I don't think has been used in 100 years, but it's still there. We intend to leave it there because we think it's a nice relic of the past and gives us a sense of history. You know, throughout my career, I've always been in the entertainment business in one capacity or another, which of course is an important part for society. It provides a vital function, but I always felt a little bit guilty that I never really was involved in something that directly benefited mankind. And I know that everybody's reaction is going to be, but entertainment is important, art is important to mankind, and it's true, I don't argue with that, but it wasn't quite enough for me. The Lyme disease advocacy that I've been doing for the last 15 years or so has been good for that, because it gave me an opportunity to educate people and try to help them so that they could avoid Lyme disease, and probably even more significantly, help the people that have gotten the disease and are not finding the right treatment, they're not getting better. Trying to make sure that the medical community, the political community, and just the residents in general understand this disease. It's not gotten the medical community's attention that it really deserves, because it's not perceived as much of a threat. They think it's a very minor disease. And unfortunately, I've just been in contact with way too many people where it's really ruined their lives. We have a whole underground community here of people who never leave their houses because they're so disabled by this disease. In the early 1990s, I got Lyme disease, which is a very prevalent tick-borne illness in our area. And I was quite debilitated by it for a while. It made life really, really hard because there's an overwhelming amount of fatigue that goes with that disease. It makes it very difficult to function. And in fact, my whole family got that disease. I became sort of a resource because I had done my own research on it and knew a lot about it. I decided to write a little booklet about it because I got tired of saying the same thing over and over to people. I thought it would be better if I could just hand them a booklet. And to date now, that little booklet has been requested by over 250,000 people. And I hear all the time people telling me that booklet saved their lives. And that is very gratifying to me. As much as I love hearing people tell me how much they love my equipment, I equally love to hear that somebody was really had a major impact on their lives from that little booklet that I wrote.
The bare basics because she doesn't
about 8 years ago, some other people that were concerned about the Lyme disease situation, and I formed a group, a nonprofit, a 501c3 corporation, primarily for educational purposes, so that we could help the people in our community understand Lyme disease, what it was, how dangerous it was, what they needed to do if they got Lyme disease, and educate them on how to prevent it in the first place. And as a consequence, in addition to that booklet, I and a couple of other people on our board do extensive public speaking.
W Fearn is going to speak. He is the, I guess you call yourself the president of the Southeast Pennsylvania Lyme Disease Association. He himself has Lyme disease. He's the speaker tonight.
Thank you, Rita, and thank you, everybody, for coming out tonight. We're going to give you sort of a general introduction to Lyme disease, so we're not going to talk about too much in a lot of detail, but we're going to give you a good basic education in Lyme disease. Some of you know a lot about it already, and some of this will be a little redundant, but you can always learn something new. When Lyme disease was first described in Lyme, Connecticut in the 1970s, it was described by a rheumatologist who saw Lyme as an arthritic disease because that was his specialty. But now we know that Lyme disease is much more of a neurological disease than it is an arthritic disease. It can cause headaches, it can cause swollen glands, it can cause unexplained fevers, and like I said, all these symptoms can change very quickly, come and go, and be replaced by new things all the time. Since 1982, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, has required that doctors and laboratories report this disease for their statistics. So where does Lyme disease occur? You know, where we are here in the Northeast is the hot spot. It started up in here with, you'll probably never see this. Oh, you can. Right up in here where Lyme, Connecticut is, and it spread from there up and down the East Coast. 44% of the people recall being bitten by a tick. And that's very typical too, because the majority of people that get Lyme disease never know they've been bitten by the tick. So if you come to our meetings, which are on the third Wednesday of each month, we meet in Kennett Square, which isn't all that far from here. It's free, open to everybody. We have speakers every month.
End of the year, I started getting sick again, and I'm pretty sick again, so.
Yeah.
Hard to know
Well,
what's going
unfortunately, I think that's typical. You know, people make progress and they slip back a little bit. And then they try something new, they make some more progress. I've spoken to all kinds of places like that. And the people are very appreciative of getting the information, and it's gratifying to me that I'm able to do something that helps them. Probably I do 30 to 50 talks a year, one type or another, to all kinds of groups. They can be other Lyme disease support groups in other areas. They could be school nurses. They could be bird watchers or a Rotary Club or a school PTA. When I started as an engineer at W Fearn, I was the first engineer they had hired there since the late 1940s. So everybody that I worked with was old enough to be my parent, you know. And it was kind of an unusual situation, and some of the people were resentful and other people were very supportive and tried to teach me what they knew and everything. But throughout that whole time, I was still recording. I was accumulating recording equipment. I didn't have a studio. I was doing recording on location. We'd just find a place where we could record and do the bands. A lot of the same people I've been doing in high school, we continued doing that. I realized that that's what I wanted to do. As much as I enjoyed radio and it paid well and it was a fun job, my future was really in a recording studio. You know, after a couple years, I was ready to go out on my own and just devote my full time to being a recording studio owner and an engineer. When you run a recording studio, you end up with every kind of music and every kind of recording you can imagine, which was great experience. It taught me a lot. One thing was to be extremely tolerant and accepting of all kinds of music. As years went on, I worked with better and better people, and I had the opportunity to work with some of the world's best musicians in the studio, and those projects were extremely gratifying and just terrific. The time flew by, and it was just magic to watch these people at the top people and how effortlessly they created great music. But that was the minority of the time that I was recording. Most of the projects I did weren't that good, and one day I came to the realization that I was better at what I did than most of the people I worked with were at what they did. And when you get to that point in your career, it's very hard to come into work every day and with enthusiasm. So at some point there, I got to a stage where I just said, I just don't want to do this anymore. And at that point, an opportunity came along to work at a brand new radio station in Philadelphia that had been just put on the air. And that was a nice change from the recording world. It was a totally different world. It was a world, I used to say it was a world of grown-ups. These were business people. It was very cut and dried, and that was a great learning experience as well, because I learned a lot about how do you really run a business. I have been in business myself since I was 14. The first business I had was a printing business that I printed stuff for people. Except for those 2 periods of my life when I worked in radio, relatively brief periods of time, I've never worked for anybody else. And working at this more recent radio station not only taught me a lot about business, but it taught me a lot about how businesses run today. And one of the things that I came to realize was that people had no confidence in their own decision making. They had no confidence in their own ability to solve problems. What programming do you put on the radio station? Who do you hire? Everything was decided by market research or consultants. It made me realize at one point that that wasn't the way I wanted to run a business. I wanted to run a business where I made the decisions based on what I had learned over a lifetime of doing things. And that's when I decided to get into the business I'm in now, which is manufacturing professional audio equipment. This receiver was made by the Collins Company in 1955. It's been a favorite of mine for many, many years. I always liked not only the aesthetics of equipment like this, I just think it's beautiful industrial design, but it's also a very precision piece of equipment. All vacuum tubes, but they just really knew what they were doing with it. And when you look inside a piece like this, you'll see that the type of construction is pretty much exactly what I'm doing today. The same types of point-to-point wiring and so on. So these things were my inspiration. This is one of my favorite aspects of my job is working on developing new products. Most of the products that I've designed over the years are really based on a need that I had for something I wanted to use myself, either to solve a problem or to give me a better tool than what I had available before. And when I have time, I like to come down here and work on new things. This chassis here has been used for probably 4 or 5 different ideas until I find something that starts to sound like what I want. When you build equipment point to point, it's very labor intensive because every single component has to be, the leads have to be formed, it has to be wrapped around the terminal that it's going to and soldered individually, and it takes a lot of time. And it needs a level of skill that it isn't commonly available today. That's a lost art. And I've been very fortunate over the years to locate the people that are capable of doing this kind of point-to-point wiring. And not only are they capable of doing it, but they love it. They like the elegance of that assembly method. And even though it's long, it's tedious, it takes a long, long time, some of our products have 35, 40 hours of labor in them just to build one unit. And that's reflected in the price. Bill Coe has been building stuff for me for about 6 or 7 years now, and I think he's probably my senior guy at this point. And he can build any of our products, which is a big help because he knows every single product. All my assemblers are really good craftsmen, but Bill really sets the standards for everybody else. In addition to that, he's a big help to me because he often comes up with really good ideas. He can come to me with a little sketch one day and say, you know, next time we run this metalwork, can we change these holes? And it seems like such a minor thing, but when we do that, it just makes everything fit together better and makes his job easier, makes my job easier, and it just works well all around. Bill, like all my assemblers, works at home, but he has the most amazing setup. It just gives you a sense of just how seriously he takes his job. You know, that is reflected in the work because he's got a very pleasant, relaxed, wonderful environment to work in. It's a separate building in back of his house. He can go out there and spend all day building stuff and not be interrupted, which can be very important during the assembly, some of the intricate stuff. And the results speak for themselves. I mean, he just does beautiful work.
Hey, Doug. How you doing? Good to see you.
Good to see you too. How's it going?
Good, good.
Good. Yeah, it's such a nice, great spot to work. It's beautiful.
Thanks. Keeps me sane.
Yeah.
So, got a VT7 here.
Looks great.
It's, we're at the point now where I'll be mating the back panel to the chassis, wiring the connectors, and if there's time, the fan and the AC portion of it. All right, what we're doing here is wiring up the rear panel of a VT7, which is essentially the XLR connectors and the AC section, to a completed chassis. I'm using a high silver content unleaded solder to conform with the RoHS directives. And it's tough stuff to get, but I think it makes a superior connection than the regular kinds of solder. I first started working for Doug probably about 5 or 6 years ago. Took a bunch of pictures of gear I'd already built, took it up as like a little portfolio, and pretty soon after that I was building mic preamps for the next couple of years. It's very gratifying to do this kind of work because Doug's very open to suggestions. If there's just something that may make the layout a little easier, or maybe be able to save on a terminal strip or something like that, there's just tons of stuff like that that you get to do. And it's always a challenge. I enjoy working on Doug's stuff also because there's a real tradition of sort of tube audio in the Philadelphia area left over from the RCA area over in Camden. And this is sort of the best of the old with the best of the new. For me, actually, I prefer to do point-to-point work. I call it sculpture, when it's all the, precise right-angle bends and crimps and everything like that, that gives you a real bulletproof bit of construction. In my notes, I know exactly what bends and what lead lengths I need for any particular component placement. Every connection is looped around, crimped, and then soldered, as opposed to just sticking it through the lug and just filling the thing with solder. I think reliability is always an important thing to keep in mind, especially since I know Doug thinks of these units as something that's going to be in use for 20, 25 years, handed down from owner to owner. Hand building the stuff gives you sort of greater long-term ability to maintain a particular design for years and years and years, even though components are constantly coming in and out of vogue or stock. One of the more time-consuming but vital parts of this whole process is constructing and maintaining a detailed construction manual for each unit. I have 5 or 6 binders over there, one for each unit. And so here's the VT7 with a nice picture on the front of it. And then it's broken down into, that would be the bare chassis with measurements for additional holes, modifications for the drill press. And then that's the individual amplifiers with the component values written on it. And so a good part of constructing these things is every once in a while when you make a change to document it fully. Doug's by far the superior troubleshooter. And it's one of the things I find fascinating about his job, because he's probably seen so many ways of messing up each one of these units that he has a insight into troubleshooting that's like nothing I've ever seen before.
Well, thanks
for
Bill.
coming by.
These 2 VT7s are sold, so as soon as they're done, they're on their way. I think one goes to Paris, and I think the other one goes to India. When I first started showing these products at the AES show and my dealers would show them to people, the question I always got, 2 questions. One was, why is it so expensive? And the second was, why is it red? It's so expensive because from the beginning I wanted products that were the best possible quality that I could attain. That was really important to me personally, and that's the market that I was aiming for. So we do a lot of things using very expensive custom-made parts, and individually, each of those little things may not make a whole lot of difference. But if they make 2% difference, you might not hear that. But if you have 10 things that are 2% better, then you got 20% better. And that can be pretty significant, and everybody will hear that. I'm traveling up to Nazareth, Pennsylvania, which is about 90 miles north of here, and it's the home of the Martin Guitar Factory, where they use some of my equipment. And we're going to visit Bert there, and he's going to give us a little tour of the place and show us how they use the equipment at the Guitar Factory.
I work in the Research and Development Department for the C.F. Martin Guitar Company in Nazareth, Pennsylvania. And I've been using Doug Fearn's preamplifier for my R&D testing when we're measuring sound quality. And if we're going to make any sort of change to the guitar, as far as the finish goes, or maybe change a bracing location, if we're going to work with a new material or a new design, we'll do some sound testing around that. Now, when I do my objective sound quality testing and measure the actual projected sound of the guitar, I'll use a Earthworks QTC30 omnidirectional flat response microphone and simply just play the guitar through the Doug Fearn VT2 preamplifier. So basically I'll just strum strings open, take some measurements. We'll look at the instrument as a whole. We'll play individual notes. We also do some vibrational testing as well in the modal analysis, in which different techniques are used. When I was looking at preamps, I tried several different brands, and the W Fearn really brought out the true sound quality of the Martin guitar. I just thought it had that nice warm sound to it, but it was also still very transparent, and that's what really drew me to it. So we decided on the Fearn, and probably about a year or two later, I picked up the compressor. We use a lot of exotic woods in the construction of our instruments, so we are very active in looking at new materials that are domestically grown, or even man-made materials. We produce roughly just under 200 different models currently. If you look back at the way we built D28s back in the 1930s, which is considered to be our golden era, you're going to notice major changes in that particular model from that time period and the way we currently make it. So part of my job is kind of being making sure that we don't have those sort of drastic changes people would notice. Going to the Fearn, I was able to see a little bit more articulation and a little bit more trueness in the sound of the instrument when I'm looking at the signal through a spectrogram or a spectrograph. All right, well, I'm just going to play a couple, musical recordings that we made down here using the Fearn equipment. In this particular evaluation, we have a D28. We did limited edition guitars for him. Actually, Paul McCartney and John Lennon and George Harrison played our guitars. Of course, Elvis on his first album had his Martin guitar covered in leather. These are all pre-finish operations, doing some preparation for finishing, adding some vinyl sealer, applying filler to the wood in the back here. Clayton here's doing some inspection on the frets, making sure that everything's working the way it should, or it's playing the way it should, the action's adjusted correctly. And we do 2 inspections after Clayton's done inspecting this guitar. He will put it in the case, and we'll put it in the warehouse for about 8 days, and then we'll do a second inspection after 8 days, and if it passes that inspection, we ship it out to our customers. Every single model gets inspected.
Yeah.
This is where we make all the parts for the guitar. We have CNC machines, series of different types of shapers and table saws and sanders we use for creating the parts of the guitar. Do all of our matching of woods down there, fabrication of our necks, fingerboards, bridges, things of that nature.
Bert, tell me about the recording you do in here, aside from the testing and everything. What kinds of projects do you do?
Well, we occasionally we'll record the guitars to send out for maybe an advertisement that maybe we're doing some sort of co-op sort of marketing program with a dealer.
Where do you record that? Do you record it right in here?
We'll record it right in here, yeah. And typically we'll use both the VT2 and the VT7 for those recordings. We have very dynamic instruments without that compressor. Sometimes it's hard to harness and get it, as best of recording as you can. So.
Yeah. Well, it's really an honor for me to have my equipment in a place like this. It just thrills me every time I think about it. So I appreciate it.
Well, we appreciate the quality that you put into your product, and that was one of the things that really drew me to your products. Is that number one, they are made only an hour and a half away from here. They're very well respected. They're built at the best quality, and if I need to call your company, I wind up talking to you, and that's kind of important to me as well. So.
Yeah.
Exchange our Christmas thanks. I know the best gift.
When I originally started, I wanted to build the best possible microphone preamp, equalizer, compressor, whatever it was that I was designing. And instead of designing to a price saying this is what the market will bear, I just designed it according to what I wanted it to do, and then determine what the price would have to be.